Hey everyone, Genome here, bringing you yet another episode of my Comics Nostalgia Talks. This video is kind of inspired by a fellow YouTuber named The Boy Who Had Seven. He did a video on a bunch of Venom issues, different key issues for Venom, first appearance of the symbiote, that sort of thing. And he got to talking a lot about basically the time frame that I used to collect pretty heavily. That's late 80s, early 90s, with the emphasis on the early 90s. That's when I had more disposable income to play with, And it kind of got me thinking a little bit, and I touched a little bit about this on my last video, but it really got me thinking, like, how much of the Wild West it really was back then in the 90s. And let me see if I can put it into words of that people can actually see. If you weren't around or collecting in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, all the way up to probably the mid 90s, you just don't know what you missed. It was just insane. If you think that the artist pool is stacked now, you should have seen it back then. And while many of the same artists are still continuing to draw to this day, it was just incredible how many artists were in the stable of, like, say, one distributor. For example, Marvel had, at one time, McFarlane, Bagley, Lim, Texeira, Liefeld, Portacio. The list goes on and on. Jim Lee, of course, how can I forget Jim Lee there? But this is all just one comic book distributor. And they could just be working on one book, 1 month, and next just move right on to another. So there was just quality all around. And back in the 90s, if they had an idea, they just released it. Comics were moving extremely well back then, especially for Marvel. Marvel is what I mainly collected back then. I was definitely more of a Marvel guy than DC guy. I also had quite a bit of Dark Horse, but maybe more on that later. They just would put out anything. It seemed like every month there was a new hero being released, a new villain being released, lots of first appearances of. There was a new gimmick being tried, with either being a variant cover or bagging of a comic in the factory, or holograph embossments. It was just wide open, and they did it. They just went and did it, and it seemed like they could do no wrong because everything they did just moved. Back in those days, we didn't really have a lot of numbers to look at, and this was kind of something that comic stores didn't really talk about too much, but it was no big deal to move 300,000 units. It really wasn't. Even some of their most poorly selling stuff was hitting almost 100,000, I think. It's so hard today when you look at the numbers that are just being shipped, let alone what's actually being bought, compared to the numbers that were getting thrown out back then. It just kind of boggles the mind. But I kind of posted on his site. In fact, go give his video a check out. I'll put the link in the description below. But just for an example here, even back then, a price guide and comic book news magazine was a work of art. Look, this is the Wizard #1 by McFarlane. That's a pretty nice cover for a price guide, which is essentially a price guide and a trade book. And these turn into collector's items themselves. I had the first several issues. I remember when they first came out, we were all hoping for a more centralized price list. And that's one we kind of went by a lot of times. But when the price guides look that good, something. The industry is going in the right direction. Unfortunately, what wound up happening is the market was severely oversaturated. They couldn't keep cranking out those numbers forever, and people started kind of getting wise to shall we say, overinflated pricing, not so much on the issues themselves, but the valuation of them afterwards. You would see stuff hit the shelves, and 2-3 months later it's tripled in price, quadrupled in price. It was insane, you know, and people weren't taking into consideration that, you know, one of the great things that goes into pricing of, you know, any kind of rare item is just rarity. And when you're pushing out 1 million copies of something, it's not exactly rare anymore. So, and it was easily collectible by lots of people. So, I think a lot of people start getting wise to it, and that's kind of one of the things that got me out of it, actually, was the extreme overvaluation that price guides and stuff were putting on to newly released books. Just because they were selling well. People were going on the assumption that it would be worth a lot, because it was. And some of them still are. Don't get me wrong, it's just that it was funny when I would go into a comic store, say, 10 or 15, even 15 years after I had stopped collecting, and seeing that the things that were, you know, $40, $50, you know, the same year of release, or, you know, a couple years after release, were down to like $5, you know, and I don't know, I mean, it's a shame that it happened, but this was more of a fault of the, you know, distributors just, you know, maybe pushing a little too much product out there. But once again, can you blame the distributor for pushing out a product that people are buying up? I mean, yeah, you have to worry about oversaturation of the market, but, you know, they're buying it. So if you're moving, you know, 500,000, 1 million units of something, and in some cases quite a bit more, why wouldn't you want to do it? So I know it's kind of a double-edged sword, and they gave the people what they wanted, but then the people realized they kind of didn't want what they were getting for a little while. Not to saying that they didn't want the books. There's a couple of collectors out there, or, you know, for the collectors out there who, like, the intrinsic value of actually owning the book itself, the story within, the artwork on it, whatever, was worth it. It was worth the price of admission. But I think a lot of the more casual collectors and people with more of a short-term investment, you know, kind of mentality, they just kind of abandoned ship while they could. So, you know, anyway, you know, that's probably not a great microcosm of what happened, but I mean, that's kind of how I saw it through my eyes. But anyway, the 90s was just really nice. It was just incredible. I mean, like I said, in the artwork, the storyline, the story arcs, character creation, it was just all top-notch for the most part across basically all the distributors. They were everywhere. I didn't bring any up here with me out of the vault, but for example, we had Impact Comics. I'll do a little story on them later, but you know, they went out there and tried it. They didn't stick around too long, but they tried to put a whole new comic line out there with a new set of heroes and all that, and kind of an Art Deco look about things, or a DC Light way about it. But you know, they just went and tried it, and you know, for a little while they were moving issue. You know, not tons like the big boys, but you know, but they went and tried it. But I mean, as far as like the big distributors, you just never know what they were going to do. I mean, I'll go ahead and show you some examples now. I mean, you won't be able to see or tell. And once again, I'm sorry. Some of these are ones that received water damage years ago, so I just keep them around for nostalgia. But yeah, you probably can't see it, but it's warped real bad. You know, this cover is embossed. It's raised, and just, you know, this was nothing special book for them. Punisher wasn't a huge mover, but they were always doing stuff like that. Another example of embossment here was this Venom. You know, one and done right here. It's just, you know, bright colors, nice big textures, and of course by Ron Lim, so great art. Just as an example there. They went pretty crazy with foil. Oh, this one's really damaged, sorry. But hopefully it comes through with the light reflecting on it. But yep, Sorcerer Supreme gets a little swag. And it's kind of hardbound too on the cover, so. But stuff like that moved comics, you know. It was the bright, shiny, was it key ring syndrome? Or the crow that's always picking at something shiny and bright. I mean, then you have variant covers, or multi-cover issues. Oh boy, that shine is bad. But the Joker's Wild is one of the great examples of it. A hologram on each cover, which each cover was a great work of art. Anyway. And it moved a ton of issue. It was actually a pretty cool story of Robin coming into his own in the absence of Master Bruce. Web Spider-Man 50 was a big mover, or excuse me, number 90, because of the hologram on there. They love these holograms. I had the first couple of editions of the Marvel trading cards, and the holograms. We used to actually. It was so bad. We wanted the holograms so bad. They were pretty hard to collect. I think there was 5 released in each set. That we would sit there because it was always a bonus card in the packs, and the packs were in like this kind of elasticy plastic. It wasn't like a regular trading card kind of plastic. So if you really took your time, if you grew your fingernail out, you could actually count the cards that are in there. And I think if there was 6 or 7 cards, whatever it was, there was an odd number of card or an extra card in there than the normal pack. You knew there was a hologram inside, so you'd buy that one particular pack. I mean, DC did it too. Well, we saw that with the Joker book, but I mean, that's got nice foil on there for added visual effects. They didn't just do it with relatively cheesy things like foil either. They had deep red foil stuff like the Venom. I didn't bring that up, but I mean, a series like Aliens vs. Predator. Dark Horse releases a series called Aliens vs. Predator, and it is a monumental story arc. Every cover is just gorgeous. I used to have these hanging on my wall when I was in high school. But and once again, I mean, they were existing IPs and all, but I mean, they weren't exactly comics gold. They released them and to great effect, and look what they spawned. And, this once again is as well, product of kind of 90s innovation and willingness to take a chance on something. I mean, and probably the best example, really, of the 90s and the 90s comic boom, as it were, and what they could release and just move was, X-Men Revisioned 1, the number 1 selling comic of all time. You won't be able to see it on this camera, but I'll put it on the B-roll. And they released them. I think it was 2 weeks apart. I want to say the different, the variant covers, which was all one big, basically cover. And they released the most boring one first with Peace, Storm, and I think it's Jean Grey on there, and Professor X in the background. And we were salivating to get the next ones because we knew that was going to be the next big thing, And it was. I mean, they moved, 8 million units of these or something like that? It was some obscene amount. And of course, it's a Jim Lee cover, so it's going to be stupendous. And of course, they finish up with Magneto. But just incredible. The amount that they moved. And now, X-Men was a popular franchise already. It was a popular property. So it wasn't a big surprise that it moved, but I don't think anyone was thinking they would move that many. I think the number 2 comic back then ever released, and this one honestly doesn't make as much sense to me, but they did something different again. Here we go. What did they do? X-Force number 1 with the factory freaking wrap on it. It's in its own, it's pre-Mylar with collector's cards. In each one, different ones. I think there was 5 or 6, I can't remember for sure. I have most of them. Let's see which ones did I bring up. Cable, Sunspot, Gideon. And this one sold several million copies as well. And what a nifty idea, right? It comes pre-bagged. So not only does it appeal to the hardcore collector, it also appeals to the normie. By releasing, it was actually probably the most genius one they ever did. By putting a different trading card in each one, guess what? And they weren't sold separately. The cards, you had to buy them with the comics. So unless the comic store, busted open the thing to sell the card to you, which no one was doing back then, you had to buy at least 5 or 6, however many there was, issues to get them all. So $1.50 each. There you go. So now we're talking $7.50, $8, $9. $10, depending how many of the cards you wanted, all for one issue. It's brilliant. And I don't really think X-Force is all that great of a team up anyway. I mean, I didn't really find any of the characters too interesting at all. But it just moved. And then, once again, it's just indicative of the 90s. And it was wide open. It was a great time to be a collector. And, you know, if it's probably good that I got into it when I had very little money, because gosh only knows how much I would have bought. You could literally walk into a store, like say, even when I was working, when I was a young teen, you know, freshman in high school, whatever. So I had a little money in my pocket, you know. So I'd go in there with, say, 20 bucks. I had $20 leftover cash or whatever from payday. And you go into the LCS, you know, basically it's bi-weekly every then, back then too, for most of the good stuff. So you'd walk in there and you think, okay, well, most stuff is 75 cents to $1, at least toward the late 80s and all. So right, you can go in there and lay your 20 down, get everything you wanted, and probably get some change back, you know, for a burger and fries later, at least. This was not the case back then. There were so many good titles out there, and everything was a must-have. Must-have, must-have, must-have. The hype was real, even though there was no internet, even though it was all basically word of mouth from LCS to Hungry Collector, you know, and the rumor mill that would get going. So yeah, you could go in there and do 20 bucks and not get everything you wanted. And this was every other week, you know, or at the very least monthly. I know I had to make a lot of hard decisions of what I wanted because everything looked so good on the stands. I was collecting at least 15, 16 titles back then. And it's just, you know, words can't describe it. It is a period of time in collecting, like a pop culture thing. It probably won't be seen again. Especially with the advent, you know, of, you know, online retailing and or more like online releases and stuff, things like that. People have no problem just reading stuff on the internet, and I mean that's not how I like to do it. I like a physical copy in my hand, as I'm sure most of the old timers do. But maybe that's a way of weeding out the chaff. You know what I mean? Now it's nothing left but hardcore collectors, and I don't know whether that's the case or not. I don't know. Let me put X-Men out there. In all its glory, maybe on B-roll you can see it all, but yeah, that's just, I don't know, that's just, his video kind of inspired mine in talking about, or at least getting a glimpse of what it was like back then. It was just so crazy, and from everything I watch nowadays and hear about from other people, it's not really like that nearly as much anymore, you know, outside of real hardcore collectors. But, you know, it is what it is. You know, to all things, change must come. And, you know, the comics industry is no different. But anyway, I think I ran on long enough about it. You know, it was just it was a good time. And it's a time I have great fond memories of. So, anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Please stay tuned for more content coming up in the near future. If you like this kind of format of, you know, the whole nostalgia comic kind of thing, little comic talks, just let me know, and I'll, you know, crank out some more. I got a lot of old issues to go through, you know, so I could probably spend years, even with what little comics I have remaining after the Great Flood, as I call it. You know, there's still plenty of things to go through and review. So I'll probably have some more comic reviews coming up here shortly too, not just walks down nostalgia lane. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Until next time, this is Genome, missing the 90s, out.